Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to the 11th session of FNA's CBDC broadcast. We're very happy you're joining us today. I'm Carlos Leon, and I'm your usual host in this series of CBDC broadcasts. We will give the audience a few minutes to log in and join. In the meantime, I'm going to do some housekeeping. The CBDC broadcast, as you already know, follows a 60-minute format in which our guests will provide expert insight into the latest developments and innovations influencing the discussions and implementations of CBDCs today. You can use the Q&A widget below to ask questions. Speakers will aim to answer as many as they can during the 10-minute question and answers part. Please do not forget Chatham House rules applies, as well as speakers' personal disclaimers. So now we have our two guest speakers today, Commissioner Hester Peirce from the U.S. Securities and Exchange Commission, and Patrick McCarty, Adjunct Professor of Derivatives, ICOs and Cryptocurrencies at Georgetown University Law Center. And I'm going to start with a summary of the topic, which today gathers Commissioner Peirce and Patrick McCarty, which is the following. Nowadays, we're starting and discussing the potential effects of a digital dollar. We've, in fact, had several news this week about how some pilots or how some tests are going to start in the coming weeks or months. Obviously, a digital dollar is a digital liability used by the Federal Reserve that should be available to everyone in the United States. In other words, that's the retail CBDC for the United States of America. We all have heard about the theoretical benefits around the idea of a CBDC, and that those could include greater efficiency, redundancy in the payments ecosystem, could lay the grounds for innovation, it could increase financial inclusion, and it has the potential to lay the foundations for better cross-border transactions. Obviously, not only those benefits are to be verified or tested, but there are risks as well in the form of financial instability concerns, operational risk, reputational risk, surveillance, and money laundering risk as well. And we all know that, and this has been addressed in our previous CBDC broadcast, devil is in the details. And CBDCs are not the exception. If a digital dollar is issued, regulation and design will be particularly responsible for its success or failure. So, having explored CBDC motivations and challenges from Asia Pacific, Latin America, the United Kingdom, and Canadian perspectives, today I want to welcome Commissioner Hester Peirce of the U.S. Securities and Exchange Commission and Professor Patrick McCarty of Georgetown University Law Center and the Catholic University of America. In the middle, and this is very coincidental to our talk today, we're going to have this very interesting conversation about digital dollar, cryptos, and stablecoins in the middle of FTX turmoil. So I am sure that this is going to be a very interesting conversation, not that we're going to focus on FTX, but I am sure that the audience will have some questions regarding that. So once again, Patrick, Hester, thank you for joining us. I'm sorry for this very long summary, but I think it was necessary to put everything into context. First, I would like to give you some space to make your first comments and perhaps your disclaimers, if necessary.
Sure. Let me start with a disclaimer, several disclaimers actually, and Carlo, I'm grateful for the chance to be here, and it's great to be with Professor McCarty as well. And thanks to FNA, I do have to give a disclaimer that I'm not endorsing any technology, any product, any service, including FNA. So while I appreciate the opportunity to be here, I'm certainly not endorsing any product or service, and that needs to be very clear to your audience. Second disclaimer is that my views are my own views and not necessarily those of the SEC or my fellow commissioners. And my third disclaimer is that while I understand this is a Chatham House rules event, I do not abide by the Chatham House rules. My remarks are on the record, and if you ask me something that suggests that you are committing securities fraud, I am not going to hold that confidential either. So with those disclaimers, I will say I'm happy to be here. Obviously, my views on CBDCs are a little bit tangential in the sense that I'm a securities regulator, and so I do have some thoughts on the topic, but my primary concern as a securities regulator is thinking about how the securities laws apply to various assets, including, in this instance, crypto assets.
That's great. Thank you, Hester. Patrick.
I don't have any disclaimers. I just want to say thank you for having me. And I'm looking forward to the discussion, and I'm sure that it's going to be very interesting.
Thank you both. So first question is just to give like some ground to the audience about your work in this area that we're going to talk about. Can you please give us a brief update on your work in the digital currencies realm? Patrick.
Yeah, thank you. So I'm both a practicing lawyer as well as a law professor. So I've been teaching a crypto seminar at Georgetown University Law Center since 2018. And I've started teaching a similar kind of seminar over at Catholic U Law School as well. Started last year. I'm scheduled to go in and actually teach that this coming semester as well. But I have some clients in the space, and it's a really interesting kind of arena, of course, based on what we have going on. But I've also been very involved in helping draft legislative proposals. I helped Representative Don Beyer introduce HR 4741, the Digital Market Structure Improvement and Customer Protection Act, which was introduced last year, July of 2021, which was the first comprehensive digital asset proposal introduced in the Congress. So I've been doing a lot of things, lots of activity, and it's wonderful.
Thank you, Patrick. Hester.
Well, the SEC has been a major player in the discussion around regulation of digital assets, but has actually done more enforcement than regulation, and that's been a critique of mine. I think that we obviously have a role to play in enforcing the securities laws as they touch digital assets, and we see a lot of fraud and a lot of bad activity in the crypto space, and some of that is within our purview to address, and we should be doing that, and we have done some of that, and we'll continue to. But what I would like to see us do is think about how we can use the securities laws and the exemptive authority that Congress gave us under the securities laws to develop a regulatory framework around crypto that makes sense, that allows for better discernment of the good from the bad. I think one of the problems that we've seen is because there isn't a clear regulatory framework, a lot of the people who want to do this in a legitimate way are standing on the sidelines, and there's a lot of activity that's happening that is not carried out by people who aren't particularly concerned about the securities laws or any other kinds of laws, and so that can be problematic. I think we, at first, at the SEC, just sort of hoped crypto would go away. And so that was part of the reason that we didn't take a proactive approach. And more recently, I think the approach has been to try to bring people into the regulatory system through the enforcement door. But what that ends up doing is it ends up creating a negotiation between an entity that is under investigation and the SEC enforcement division, not in the light of day, but in sort of in a back room. Whereas what you want to do when you're building a regulatory structure is to have that conversation with lots of different industry participants, with consumer protection and investor protection advocates, with our fellow regulators at the CFTC, with the banking regulators. Having that conversation much more upfront and out in the open is likely to generate a better result for everyone involved.
That's really interesting. Thank you, Hester. Thank you, Patrick. So now let's start with the main questions. From a regulatory perspective, what would you consider to be the challenges and implications of issuing a digital dollar, having cryptos, or having stable coins in an economy such as the US? Patrick, let's go.
Clarity. We need to have clarity. We need to basically figure out exactly, define what they are. And this is a legislative function as opposed to a regulatory function. It needs to be, the US Congress needs to basically define and set some very clear lines related to which cryptos are considered to be securities, which cryptos are considered to be commodities, and allocate authority between the CFTC and the SEC in that regard. With respect to stable coins, I think to the extent that we've got Tether and USDC and Binance USD, which are huge volumes on a daily basis, there needs to be some type of regulatory structure around that as well. I think that that's something which I'm kind of surprised has not occurred. I think if we do end up with getting legal certainty and legal clarity regarding this, and that's only through legislation, I would argue, then you're going to give the industry and the market, the digital asset market, an ability to grow. I mean, I think the most important thing here is to let innovation have a clear view of what their requirements are, where they fit regulatorily, and then let them comply with the rules as we move forward and let the regulators do their job in terms of taking care of it. To date, as was pointed out by Hester, there's been this sort of each agency does their own thing, and it's not really a coordinated action. And it's, still people are arguing about what is this? So I think that's where I see it.
Thank you, Patrick. Hester.
No, I agree. I think that having clarity that is derived from conversations among multiple regulators is a healthy thing to do. And Commissioner Pham at the CFTC and I wrote a piece some time back saying, why aren't we together jointly holding some roundtables and discussing these issues? And I think even if these ultimate questions of where the authority belongs end up being decided in Congress, as regulators, we're able to do a lot more of that legwork and having those conversations and kind of trying to flesh out what the issues are. It's easier for us to do some of that, and then Congress can take that and take it into consideration as they figure out what they want to do at the end of the day. And events of recent weeks, I think, make it more likely that some people will really be calling for a regulator of trading platforms where crypto assets are traded. And so that's an area where Congress might come in and they might say, we think the SEC would be a great regulator in this space because the SEC has a lot of experience with retail customers and, really understands how to regulate these kinds of platforms in the equities world. Or they might come in and say, we think it should be joint with the CFTC and the SEC, or perhaps they'll want to set up a separate regulator for crypto trading platforms. Again, I don't know that will happen for sure, but I think there's a lot of interest from a lot of different corners in having centralized exchanges, for lack of a better word, regulated by some federal entity.
Thank you. I would like to do a follow-up question. If I ask you legally, what is Bitcoin? It's a security? What is it?
I think the SEC, or at least the chairman of the SEC in 2018, Jay Clayton, said very clearly that Bitcoin is not a security. And I guess within 2 weeks, the Division of Corporate Finance head, Bill Hinman, said that Ether was not a security as well. And since that time, the CFTC is taking the SEC at its word and permitted CFTC regulated exchanges, CME, ICE, and others, to list futures and swaps and options on both Bitcoin and Ether. And to date, trillions of dollars in contracts have been traded on Bitcoin futures, Bitcoin options, Bitcoin swaps. Hundreds of billions of dollars have been traded on Ether, Bitcoin, futures and options and swaps as well. And so I think those two crypto assets are probably viewed as being commodities, and the ship has sailed in terms of what those are. But I think that the crypto world, and last time I checked CoinMarketCap, there are roughly 2,200 separate tokens. I think some of those are securities and some of those are commodities. And we need to basically understand that they're not just, one or the other. I think there needs to be, just like was done in Dodd-Frank, a very clear definition and jurisdictional line drawn regarding which crypto assets or tokens are considered to be securities and which ones are considered to be commodities. And then people can go on their way in terms of figuring out how to comply with the appropriate requirements under the SEC or the CFTC.
It's a matter of clarity. Hester.
I don't comment on whether particular assets are securities or not, but what I will say is that I think the approach the SEC has been taking has been quite unclear because while an asset may be sold as part of a securities offering, any kind of asset could be sold as part of a securities offering if it's sold with a promise that you can sit back and I'll do all the work and I'll increase the value. So now a very famous case in the crypto world is the Howey case. And that was a case where the underlying asset was actually an orange grove, slices of an orange grove. That didn't make those pieces of the orange grove themselves securities. They were securities because they were sold with promises that don't worry, we'll do all the work to improve this and you sit back and the money will flow into you. So in this instance, when we're talking about crypto assets, what we've done is we've looked at how it was sold. If it was sold with a promise that all that work would be done, then we've sort of implicitly treated the actual crypto token as being the security. And I think there's a real question about how that works in practice, because then if that crypto token is sold to another, from the original purchaser to a second purchaser, did the promise travel with it? And if so, how is that promise enforceable? So I think we really need to be much more crisp legally when we talk about what the security is. And that will help us then figure out how to apply the securities laws in this space.
That's a really interesting argument, Hester. Thank you very much. So let's go to the next one. The US financial system, we all know that it's a key contributor to economic growth and innovation worldwide. One of the most feared negative effects of a CBDC or crypto or stablecoins is the potential for deposit migration and disintermediation. From a regulatory perspective, would a digital dollar, crypto, or stablecoin pose a real risk of disintermediation of banks and financial stability? How can the regulation and their design avoid this? Patrick.
Well, as a former bank regulator for 10 years, I've been reading about the fact that the banking industry in the United States is very, it defends itself very clearly. And the American Bankers Association and the Bank Policy Institute have both basically made it very clear that they are concerned about being disintermediated by a CBDC, a digital dollar. I think that the Fed listens to what they have said, and they are going to design a CBDC, a digital dollar, so that it will not disintermediate the banking system in the United States. I think they've talked about a variety of ways to keep that from occurring. They've talked about limiting the amount of money in digital dollars that can be held by an individual. They've talked about accounts being that hold digital dollars not being interest bearing. All these things would protect the banking industry. And I don't think that this is going to be a real problem. It's solvable. And so I'm not really thinking that this is, that the words of the banking industry are not going to go on deaf ears at the Fed. They will make sure that this is not a problem.
Good, thank you, Patrick. Hester.
Well, from my perspective, the design of a CBDC will obviously affect the question of whether there are other entities intermediating, but I think there are real concerns about having a system where the federal government could know what every individual American was doing with her money, and that would be the case perhaps if you had a disintermediated system. But I think more generally, what people need to remember is crypto affords the potential, the opportunity to have peer-to-peer transactions, and that's a really powerful development. There will, of course, be many people who want to deal with intermediaries, entities they can go to if something goes wrong. And so that's certainly not likely to change, although there are going to be people who want to just be able to engage in peer-to-peer transactions. And so what you might end up with is a system that's built on this technology, but then has portals through which people interact with it, and those portals are going to be regulated intermediaries. That's what I would anticipate will happen. We'll see. Part of that depends on how regulation develops.
When I hear this kind of argument, which I agree with, I think that the crypto ecosystem has evolved and will evolve to some topological architecture very similar to the financial system, in which you will have something like banks. Exchanges are not obviously they're not banks, but is perhaps everything going in the ecosystem to something which is not distributed as it was expected, I mean P2P, but it's going to be something which is intermediated, which is going to be to some extent centralized?
Yeah, I mean, I think that's a very likely result. Now, a lot of people are not happy with centralization for obvious reasons, because it's centralized points of failure. And I think some of the advantages of a decentralized system is it can be more resilient. And so that's one of the things people look to. But again, I think as with most things, it's not all or nothing, one or the other.
That's true, I agree. So let's go to the next one. Most CBDC projects, pilots, and implementations have focused on retail local market. What could be the role of the digital dollar in cross-border payments? Does it make sense to have it available beyond the United States border, especially when we talk about money laundering, financial stability issues for unstable countries? Patrick, what do you think?
The dollar is the reserve currency of the world. The BIS has just come out with their most recent triennial report on FX trading. You may have seen it, came out at the end of October. $7.5 trillion a day is traded in foreign exchange. If the FX markets move in the direction which I expect, you're going to see a lot of people doing digital CBDC trading in the future. I kind of think that it's coming. And the US dollar is in 88% of all FX transactions, according to the BIS. So the euro is in something like 28% of all transactions. The yen is in 17%, and the pound sterling is in 13%. There is going to be a demand for having CBDC, a digital dollar, being able to be used in cross-border transactions. It's going to happen. It's coming. You should basically realize that. And when you look at the crypto market, I mean, it's a big day if there's $200 billion traded in the crypto market. That's versus 7.5 trillion in FX. So something tells me that you're going to see the digital dollar being used in cross-border transactions when you get to maybe 5 years from now. So
even if it's the retail CBDC.
Pardon me?
Even if it's just a retail CBDC?
Yeah.
Because that sounds like wholesale CBDC. let's say.
No, because I think the thing is, most of the things that you've heard a lot of people talking about is money transmission from the United States to the Philippines, Mexico, South America, Central America. And the answer is basically, a lot of that is basically, retail and not wholesale.
Thank you, Patrick. Hester.
Well, sure. I think that the existence of dollar-backed, dollar-pegged stable coins is, and the success of those is likely to, make it more likely that the dollar remains as the reserve currency. You don't need a CBDC to have the dollar continue to play an important role. And I think that the private approach is kind of more of a traditional American approach to doing things, and then it gives you the chance to have competition. So I do expect that will continue to be an important facet of this crypto space.
Thank you, Hester. Something related to this question, and this is something that we have discussed in this CBDC broadcast several times. Is there a first mover advantage in CBDC space? I mean, is it better for the United States or Europe to be the first G7 CBDC? Is there something about being the first one here? Patrick.
I'd argue that there isn't, and I think actually it's more relative to the U.S. and the U.S. dollar being the reserve currency of the world. I think the thing is that the U.S. wants to get a digital dollar correct. I think they also would like to get specific statutory language which would authorize the Fed to issue a digital dollar as opposed to skirting the legal issues in that arena. But more importantly, I think the thing is that the Fed is going slow on this because they would like to make sure that what they're doing is correct and appropriate. And I think they're also worried about if the digital dollar gets out, that it actually will wipe out some of the other 164 fiat currencies in the world, that other countries will start to adopt or utilize the digital dollar as opposed to their own currency. And I think that that's kind of a risk that they would prefer to avoid. So I think the thing is that the Fed is going to sit back and watch other countries. I know they're watching China very closely because of all their pilot programs on the digital yuan. But I also think that you're going to see, first and foremost, probably the Bank of Japan do a digital yen. And after that, you might see the Bank of England with a digital pound. Europe is supposed to vote on a digital euro legislation this coming year. So I think that the Fed probably would be the last of the G4 currencies to go ahead and issue a digital dollar. So they're not going to move first because they don't want to run into problems in terms of execution or basically, annoying or upsetting foreign countries by the dollar becoming, replacing their fiat currency. At least that's my view.
Thank you, Patrick. Hester.
Well, I think Patrick's right to put the emphasis on execution quality. So in the United States, if we're going to have a CBDC, it needs to be done in a way that's consistent with the principles that are so important in the United States, which include the ability to spend money without having the government know where you're spending it unless there's a reason for them to know. And so, the importance of not having a money that serves as a tool of censoring people. And there's a lot of controversy in the United States about whether or not that's possible. Is it possible to have a CBDC that honors those things? Some people think that a CBDC could be programmed in a way to protect those very fundamental principles. Others disagree strongly, and I think it underscores the importance of allowing private markets also to produce alternatives if you're going to have a CBDC to allow a private market competition. And some of that is going to happen in the form of stable coins and some perhaps in the form of other types of crypto. Again, this is outside of my purview, except to say that the digital assets that may be within my purview or may somehow touch the regulated securities markets, my goal is to try to make sure that our rules don't inhibit the ability of people to develop tools that they would find useful in their own financial lives.
That's very interesting. About what you mentioned, Hester, last week or this week, David Chaum, which is one of the fathers of digital currency privacy and anonymity, he published a paper with someone from the Swiss National Bank in which he proves that the CBDC can be completely anonymous. I mean, I have not tested it, I read it, but perhaps there is a technical way to do it. Now, a follow-up question about this thing. We were talking about, is there a first mover advantage of using something, I mean, the CBDC first? Is there a first mover advantage of having a clear crypto regulatory regime first? Patrick.
I'm not quite sure that that's the case. I think we've got Europe with their proposal. We've got various other jurisdictions that have enacted their own structures. I mean, I think the largest markets out there, and the United States being one of them, is always going to be very attractive to new products and assets. And I think the thing is that the United States is behind. They should actually do something, but they should do it right rather than basically rushing to do something that's not well thought out and structurally sound. So, I don't think that Gibraltar or Malta are going to become, or Wyoming for that matter, are going to become the haven of the crypto world. It's going to rely on, where the money is and where the people are located more than basically a jurisdiction trying to carve out its, primacy in that space. At least that's my view.
Thank you, Patrick. Hester.
We certainly should have acted earlier to do something. I agree with Patrick that the United States is always going to be a place, I hope will always be a place, but certainly is a place people want to come and develop things. And so it would make sense for us to try to put a regulatory framework in place that's good and effective. I do think some of the experimentation in other jurisdictions can be helpful for us. And I don't mean to say it's experimentation. Europe just put in MiCA, so put in a lot of thought around that. But some of what other jurisdictions have done can, help us to think through what we might want to do at the end of the day. And same is true for what some states in the United States are doing. Patrick mentioned Wyoming, and I think they've really put a lot of thought into how to regulate in this area, because there are some unique challenges. I think the technology allows for some unique advantages for a regulator because it is easier to see what's going on in many senses, but also some unique challenges. And those are issues that are being highlighted for us by states like Wyoming that are getting out in front and trying to think through some of these things. So I hope that, look, I've been outspoken in saying I don't think we should have waited, but I hope that we will take the positive from having waited in the sense of looking at what other jurisdictions have done and using that to help us craft a better approach.
Thank you, Hester. This is a very interesting, it was a very interesting question in the sense that there are several, let's say, countries or jurisdictions which are expecting that having more crypto-friendly jurisdiction regulation will bring the industry to those countries. And in fact, in the UK, there is like in the news, there's like some discussion about if the new prime minister, which is rather crypto friendly, let's call it like this, that could push a little bit the UK regulation into the crypto industry and to like bring some edge for the UK into the crypto eco space. So that was, I think that's something which is important to consider in this kind of discussions. Thank you.
Well, and I think the UK has shown that you can, by being willing to think creatively about how to interact with new financial technology innovations, you can draw people to your jurisdiction. And I think other jurisdictions have shown that too. If you can develop some sort of a sandbox where people can experiment, that can be a helpful way for innovation to happen, and also the regulator to get a view into what is happening. And so we have something to learn from that as well.
Thank you, Hester. Next one. It is well known that financial regulation and supervision always is one step behind. That's something that everyone says. And recent events with FTX, stablecoins and crypto markets are good evidence, along with non-crypto things like Lehman Brothers, LTCM, and so on and so forth. Do you think that regulators and supervisors have the knowledge, skills, and means to perform their duties on this new broad and rapidly changing field of digital forms of money and digital assets? Patrick, what do you think?
I think they're getting up the ladder on this, and I note that over at the SEC, they're hiring more and more people who have that background. I think this is just a natural process at the regulatory agencies, is to end up trying to basically hire appropriate staff who have knowledge of new areas that they don't have on staff. And it's a continuing evolution. I think the thing is the financial markets, that's what they do. They evolve, and you need to basically, the regulators have to grow with them. So I don't think this is anything unusual, quite frankly. I think it's just another, sort of step in the process of seeing financial services evolve. So I don't find this to be disturbing or confusing. It's just basically they need to hire people and get trained and understand how they should be applying the rules that they have, or what new rules they need to have to deal with the new structures and approaches that are evolving.
Thank you, Patrick. Hester.
I do think it's important for the SEC and other regulators to try to get people who have experience in the marketplace, whether that's the crypto markets or other markets, and who are knowledgeable about the technology. But to say regulators are behind, I think regulators are very familiar with some of the key concepts that repeat themselves regardless of which market you're talking about. We know a lot about thinking about counterparty risk, about thinking about the implications of leverage, about thinking about having systems in place where you are transparent and where you are regulated even inside an entity, right? Where you're thinking about how transactions work. A lot of these things are not new to crypto. They're just concepts that can be ported from the traditional financial world to the crypto world. And there are a lot of people at this agency who have been here through many of the prior crises and will be here through if there should be future crises, and will take the knowledge that they have learned from one crisis or from one failure of an entity to the next. So we shouldn't kid ourselves that just by calling something crypto, every problem that will be experienced in that area will be a new and different problem. I think Patrick's lived through a lot of these things as well, and I'm sure he's paying attention to the same red flags he was watching for 15 years ago.
That's a great answer. I'm going to tell you a little secret just to you two, not the audience. The audience is not paying attention to this, but at FNA, we have discussed a lot in our internal messaging system about this. And I think we agreed that this is not a crypto thing. FTX, this is not a crypto thing. We have seen these things happening before in other industries, in financial industry, in real sector. This is not new. The thing is that the crypto thing is what it's like, bringing the allure, like the appetite for the people to put the money into this industry, but it's not a crypto thing at the end. So I find that your final comment, Hester, I agree 100% with it. It's not a crypto thing at the end. The crypto is just like one of the vehicles that are being used here for the investment, but it's not the problem. Crypto is not the problem at the end. That's my humble opinion.
And I think we as regulators would do people a favor if we continue to underscore some basic lessons around interacting with any kind of market, which is, thinking about red flags, looking for red flags, exercising skepticism, being careful about what you're doing with your assets and in the context of what you can afford to lose, right? Thinking about what you can afford to lose. These are really important lessons. And I think another one that needs to be underscored all the time is, and even for more sophisticated market players, right? Don't fear missing out, because if you're being told that your deal is going to expire in 2 days, you got to jump on it now or you're going to lose it. You might just want to lose it and move on to the next thing, because you need to have the time to think through the pluses and minuses of that particular opportunity, and do so with enough information to make a wise choice. So those kinds of lessons are ones that we can continue to underscore.
That's great. I'm going to say just 3 elements that could summarize some of the things that we have discussed about this. I think there's the red flags. I mean, there are several red flags that ex post we always see the red flags. Before it's a little bit difficult. But there are things that are related to Finance 101. A great return normally comes with a great risk. That's Finance 101. Fear of missing out is a very powerful thing that drives people's minds crazy. And the third one is memory. People tend to forget that this has happened before. This type of things. I'm not saying FTX, but this type of things have happened several times. And as you mentioned, regulators know this very well. I agree on that. So let's go to the next one. Treasury Department's Financial Stability Oversight Council has asked for an aggressive approach to passing legislation on crypto assets. Should cryptos and stablecoins be regulated? How to avoid regulatory arbitrage by incorporating crypto firms in less strict jurisdictions? Patrick.
Yes, they should be regulated. Yes, they should be asking for approval to be able to issue a stable coin that's based on the dollar. And that's something that I think is very, very, very important. It's actually in that bill that I helped Don Beyer draft and put out there. I'm kind of surprised. I think what Hester said earlier about everybody thought that crypto was going to go away. I think that was one of the reasons why you didn't see the Treasury Department and the Fed go after the issuers of US dollar stable coins like Tether and USDC and Binance USD earlier. They just thought it would go away. Nobody's going to, who's going to buy one of those? I mean, it's kind of an interesting discussion, but they should be regulated. I think the thing is, it probably dulls the ability of the Fed to implement monetary policy and control the monetary money supply. It's probably one of the issues that you think about. I think it's been very clear that algo stablecoins aren't a particularly good idea. The Terra implosion, which was just one of many algo stablecoins to implode in the last 3 years, that those should not be probably permitted. It's just kind of an interesting space. I mean, it's a very small part of the 22,000 token digital asset world. And remember, we're not talking about any of the NFTs. We can talk about that later. There are only 88 stablecoins apparently in existence. And the only ones that have really gotten any traction are US dollar ones. And there's only about 5 of those that basically account for almost 95% of the $146 billion market cap that they have. And it's US dollar Tether, it's USDC, Binance USD, and then maybe DAI, but DAI is actually significantly smaller than those other 3 that I just mentioned. I'm not quite sure, who the right regulator for that would be is I thought that it should be either the Treasury Department or the Fed. I think I've heard SEC Chairman Gensler say that he thinks these things look like money market funds, but our friends at the President's Working Group said back in November of last year, these things should only be issued by insured depository institutions. And Congress should act quickly on this. And I'd note it's kind of interesting that there has been no action, no progress in House Financial Services or Senate Banking on that issue, which I found absolutely shocking. It was like, so hold on, this is a Democratic administration, a Democratic-controlled House and Senate, and here's the PWG, which is headed up by Janet Yellen, saying, we need you to act very quickly on this particular issue and enact legislation, and nothing's happened. It's pretty shocking. But I do believe that, in fact, when you look at stable coins, they're not securities. They're not money market funds. Remember, money market funds pay you interest. When you buy a tether, you get a tether back. And if you want to return it, you return it to them and they give you back $1. There's no interest that you get. You fail the Howey test. There's no reasonable expectation of profit from buying a tether or buying a Circle USD or buying a Binance USD. They are chips, as Gary is wont to say. So that's my view.
Thank you, Patrick. Hester.
Well, I think that legislation could be helpful in defining where the regulatory authority should lie for various pieces of this market, stablecoins and other crypto assets as well. I just hope that whatever kind of regulation comes into place grapples with some of the difficult issues, right? The issues around how do you balance people's right to be able to engage in transactions with protections in place to deal with concerns around anti-money laundering and those kinds of issues. It is a moment where we could, as a society, have some of these broader discussions about these things and not just try to put regulation in place that will take away people's ability to engage in transactions that they find to be valuable transactions for themselves. So balancing the genuine regulatory objectives that we have, in my case, that would be protecting investors, facilitating capital formation, and protecting the integrity of the marketplace. Balancing those objectives with the interest of participating in a particular asset class or experimenting with a new technology, and being able to do that in a way that's consistent with our fundamental freedoms here in the United States. It's not an easy undertaking, and I think it can be a particularly difficult undertaking when people are reeling from events that in the market that that sort of scare you into wanting to regulate quickly.
Thank you, Hester. We're running out of time. I'm going to make the last question I have for you both today, and we're going very quickly to the Q&As. Do you think that the people in the United States need, want, and are ready to use a retail CBDC or crypto or stablecoin for everyday transactions? Let's do it quick. Patrick.
Yes.
That was quick. Hester.
I think it depends. I think it depends what a CBDC looks like, and I think it also depends how a private stablecoin works. So I'm not going to be as definitive as Patrick.
Good. So first question from the audience: do you hold personally any cryptocurrencies? You're able to say, I don't want to answer, but it's something that.
Well, I can answer and say, no, I don't. I mean, I would not feel comfortable holding any kind of digital asset in the job that I'm in, because I think that would be a conflict for me. So no, I do not.
Patrick.
I own some shares of MicroStrategies, which is basically a proxy for a spot Bitcoin ETF. So I own some. It's a very, very, very small amount. And
it's a leverage position on crypto. Yeah.
Yeah, there you go.
Yeah, thank you. Would you say that the CBDC or digital dollar rollout would be a threat for cryptos in the United States, or the other way around? Patrick.
It depends. I mean, I think the thing is that it looks to me like Congress is going to say that CBDC is okay, but they're going to say that privately issued stable coins are okay as well. So we'll see.
And I think Patrick puts his finger on the right question, which is it depends how the legislation on these things comes out, because you could imagine multiple outcomes depending on how the legislation is designed.
Thank you. Is the failure of FTX a regulatory problem, Patrick?
I think it'll change the dynamic for the proposed legislation. That's for sure. I think it'll be more difficult on the crypto world, but maybe that's not such a bad thing. I kind of think that maybe the timing, I mean, had the legislation passed and been enacted into law, people might be saying, what have we done? I think it's really important. I'm going with the duck test on exchanges. If it looks like an exchange, if it quacks like an exchange, then it should be registered and regulated like an exchange. And I would say Coinbase is the perfect example of a situation where they're an exchange. There's no doubt about that. They issued their securities to the public. The SEC let their registration statement go effective. But the thing is that they're registered and regulated like MoneyGram and Western Union, which are money transmitters. And that's just crazy. I mean, the New York State Attorney General came out with a great report in 2018 talking about all the conflicts which digital asset trading platforms have and how they're not registered and regulated like exchanges, which are, what the CFTC and the SEC do. And I think that that's a huge problem for investor protection. Anyway, that's where I am.
Thank you, Patrick. Hester.
Well, as I said earlier, I think that there will be a lot of people like Patrick calling for regulation of federal regulation of trading platforms in the United States. And so I think that the obvious question is how do you design that? Who is the right regulator for it? But as I underscored before, in the meantime, there are many things that people who use these centralized trading platforms can do to protect themselves. And so, don't sit around waiting for regulators to do something. There are things you can do in the meantime.